So let me ask you a question. And I'm always curious to know because this is silly. So your grades went to like B's and C's to A's now. Like you're a freaking straight A student. That's amazing. It's been a
Yeah.
little while since I was in college, but that would be like 4.0, like when you have all A's. So cool. So how would you feel if the university came to you and said, you know what, man, you have all these A's and that is unfair. So we're going to redistribute some of your A's to the students who have D's and F's. And what that'll do is it'll bring your grades down, but it'll bring their grades up. So everybody will have C's. So everyone is more like average and equal. That is equality. That is equity. We're going to take your A's, give it to the people who aren't doing as well, and give everybody C's. How would you feel about that if your university came to you and said, this A that you worked hard for and you earned, this A plus that's yours, we're going to take that from you, redistribute it. You have a C now, and so does your peer students who had D's and F's. Now they have C's, but they're better off, so you should be happy.
Well, I think
What's up, peeps? This is Todd, and welcome back to my show. I have a special guest. I have David Nunez on, and I wanted to basically bring David on because we might be two extremes of a spectrum. And I wanted to bring him on because the best conversation I've ever had are with people that I don't start out agreeing with, and maybe we can find a dialogue and find some common ground. And so, David, welcome. First, thanks you for being here. And it's fair to say you would probably identify as a socialist. Is that accurate?
yes, very accurate. Very loud and proud socialist.
Okay, here we go. Loud and proud socialist. This is going to be a good conversation. So, what if you tell us real quick about how you came to be a socialist? Like if, it's like all your family is or whatever, what it means to you and sort of like what you think would be a more fair system in society.
Yeah, that sounds fair. How I became a socialist is I come from an immigrant family, so I was born in Mexico, and I came to the United States when I was 3. So my whole life, none of my family was political, just because we couldn't be, we had no voting rights. And once I got my citizenship in 2019, a whole new world opened up where I was able to participate in politics. So then the question was, what am I going to advocate for? Well, I knew that the immigration system was messed up because I just went through it I started the process when I was 8, and I didn't get citizenship until I was 25. So that just shows you how broken the system is. So I knew I needed to change that. So that I sought out organizations and policy that would change that. And then the more I learned about policies that would advocate and benefit not only migrants but working class people, that's how I came about to find groups like the Democratic Socialists of America, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, both really good organizations. And I started to identify more and more with what they were saying. And I think a just system that I would like to live in was a more democratic one in terms of your work. I would like to live in a world where the workers have say in what they do. They have ownership in what they make. And I think a world like that would be much more just and happy for everyone.
Got it. Well, thank you. Yeah, again, appreciate you coming on. It sounds like you went through a rough time with the immigration process. My brother-in-law is from India, and I think he also just became a citizen. And he is God. I mean, he's way older than you. He's like 50. so
Yeah,
so
yeah.
yeah, it's a long, hard road. So kudos to you and your family for coming over here and getting through that. And yeah, I can only imagine that it was crazy to go through. So then let me ask you a question, and I want to make sure that I don't put words in your mouth. I just want to get a better understanding. So you're like, you wouldn't have a problem with someone like Beyonce who makes like $40 million for like singing songs and making albums. It's more like the people that make their money through investment or owning a company. And if I'm wrong, you can tell me I'm wrong. I'm just curious.
The issues I have with are just you're correct to say it's in the way that people make money. So for example, Beyonce is an artist. She sells her labor by making music that people want to buy. So she produces, songs. That's her labor that produces. The executives don't make that. She makes that and she sells it to the public. But then when she takes that money and she invests in, let's say, real estate, or she invests in companies that, maybe have um, want to like drill oil off the coast of some country, then that's when I have an issue with it, because what they're doing is not benefiting society. It's only benefiting her. And the way that benefits her is to the detriment of other people.
Got it. Okay, so it's not necessarily high income.
No,
That
you like I said in our episode, there might be a labor billionaire here in the future. I know some athletes or some artists might, make $1 billion just from their labor. An athlete, a club will pay them to play. I know like soccer players make upwards to like 800 million just in their labor. So there might be a labor billionaire. So I don't have any problems with that. The issue is with our system that we live in perpetuates people. They might even start off as good people to do things in order to survive and make lots of money. And those things, in my opinion, aren't just or right, or they don't contribute to society.
got it. So you mentioned like Beyonce making money and then using that money to invest in like real estate. So and that's what I am. I'm a real estate investor. I basically build new construction homes and rent them out to people. And because of that, I have become financially very well off. And so what would someone in your position say to that? And I won't take offense to anything you say, by the way, if it's negative towards me. I'm just trying to get a better understanding of like what, in your opinion, and the folks who share your ideologies, like what you guys think is the problem with a guy like me building houses for people who can't afford to own their own houses, and then renting them out, and then as a natural consequence of that, I do have a financial gain.
So I think the main issue with this, if you read any like socialist theory, is the distinguishing between private property and personal property. So private property would be someone like you, they purchase property, housing, an essential need that people need. It's probably the number one thing that they need. They use it in order to amount wealth where it should be used for people to be housed. And that may be not your problem because, you are living in the system that creates this. It is the most profitable thing in the United States to purchase property and then have other people live in it and then pay you to live in it. And what I have issue is since it's our fundamental right to have housing, I want to change the system. So either that's unprofitable, where people will just stop doing it. It might become illegal, or it might we might have to like create policy to make housing prices just less, where maybe it is profitable, but just not as profitable as people can be as it is now because housing prices are skyrocketing. And then instead of building affordable housing, which a lot of homeowners don't want, they will say they want it, but then once it comes to their neighborhood and lowers their property value, we see this in states like San Francisco. You see it in New York City. You see it in Seattle, Washington. Very liberal areas. They say everyone deserves housing, but then when it's time for development to happen in their backyard that will impact their property value, then they shoot it down. And that's where I have issues with it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think there are a lot of liberal places where, they say, oh, we should house the homeless and all these things. And then as soon as like, okay, perfect, we'll put it in your neighborhood. And then they don't want it anymore. So I guess my sort of counter to the first part of your argument is I build real estate. I mean, this is what I do. So I know that most of the folks who are renting from me couldn't afford to buy a home of their own, which is a whole, other problem. And I've helped actually, I think 3 of my tenants move out of my places and buy a home of their own. So that's really cool. But some people either don't want to own a home or don't have the credit to be approved to buy a home because they, got into credit card debt and did a few other things. Or perhaps like for the area that they live in, like Seattle or New York, which is very expensive, they might not make enough money to put together a down payment for a house. So for me, it's like I'm building homes for those folks to live in. If I'm not putting those houses together, what's their alternative? If they can't afford to buy a house, they're probably going to rent, whether it's from me or somebody else. So if there aren't people like me who are providing housing, where would those folks go to live? And I understand probably your point is that housing shouldn't be expensive, but that's where we are today. Is like housing is expensive. So if I'm building affordable housing that people can move into, why is that an issue?
I don't think it's an issue. Like I said, I don't think it's an issue that you are doing it. My issue is since it's a right, the government should do it, or they should have subsidies to provide you to build it for them. Does that make sense? Like you are providing affordable housing because you want to. At any point, you can jack up your rates. Do you see what I'm saying? Like
Absolutely.
these people are bending to the will of you. It is all based on what you want to do. And I'm saying that should not be a choice. It should be based on society. And these people, yeah, they don't have many alternatives because the system that we live in just keeps turning out. Like, for example, I live in LA. There's tons of construction happening here, but it's all condos, high rises, luxury lofts. Like, who can afford to live in these? And they just sit empty because it's a good investment property. And
Hmm.
I think a solution would be to make it not a good investment property, tax it high or make it illegal to do. Or if it's vacant for X amount of time, there will be an option for the city to purchase the building back. We've seen things like this, like in Berlin, they voted to for the city to physically buy three apartment buildings that were vacant for over 2 years because housing is needed for the citizens that live there, and they took action to house the people, and that's something that would be unheard of here in the United States. So
Hmm.
policies like that, I think they're not enough, but there would be a step in the right direction.
So then, do you think that housing should be free then?
Um, I don't think it should be free. Like even if you look at places like Cuba, it's not free. You still have to pay a little bit, but it's such a little amount that everyone can afford to have one or two houses. You're allowed to have two houses at least in Cuba because it's personal property. It's not private property.
Got it. Okay. So basically, what would be a system in place where, so what you're saying is we should figure out a way to not have the value of real estate continue to rise.
I think I think a more accurate statement would say not have housing be a revenue mechanism for people since it's an essential need. That's like I look at it as like making water, profitable or roads. Let's just say like every road we have, someone's gonna buy them and then pay people or charge people to get on it. Like if we did that, people would say that's so unfair. It's we need it to get around. And I think the same applies for housing. It's so unfair. People need to live. They don't have to own a house. At least they can afford to rent a house. And I think it's great that people like you exist, but there are plenty of more people like you that are the opposite and just want to squeeze every penny out of people.
Hmm. Yeah. I guess for me, I struggle with any time the government is going to administer something, excuse me. I think it always sounds great on paper, but then in practice it can be less desirable than if a private entity were to do it. So that the government houses that I'm aware of are like way shittier than anything that a private real estate investor would own. And I understand there are slumlords too, like those exist. But like I'll go back to the road scenario. So we pay for roads through tax revenue, right? That's a fair assessment. So taxes go to build roads, and of course we need roads. But the roads here in Seattle, the roads in LA, are full of potholes. And if it was instead, and I'm not saying that the roads should be privatized. I actually don't believe they should. But it just goes to show like there are some things that are actually better because it's a private company that's competing for dollars. Like the government is going to get their tax money no matter what. So they don't actually have to do a good job because if they need revenue, they can just raise taxes and they're going to get that money. Where a private business has to be providing some sort of value, or they have to be providing the goods at a decent cost or something to actually have people that want to do business with them to stay afloat. Otherwise they'd go out of business if they're doing such a terrible job, or they jack up the prices or whatever. Eventually the market will decide, okay, that business should no longer exist, and then they go under, where a government entity is just going to get money through taxes so they don't have to be as good.
I think that's where we fundamentally disagree. I don't think, like for example, I don't think a company can provide value and then like they exist because they provide value. If we look at just any hedge fund companies, any like companies that mine your data like Honey, the saving app, they just mine your data through a plugin. Like what benefit are they providing to society? There is none. There is none. So I don't accept the premise that a company has to provide value in order to exist. I think especially like housing companies, like here in where I live, the Irvine company is a huge example. They have so much land and everyone hates them, but they have to deal with them because they pretty much monopolize the rental properties here in Orange County. So if you want to rent, you're gonna have to go through the Irvine company, a company that no one likes. They're not really providing much like benefits because people need to live. And I think that like you don't know very many good examples here in the United States because our public housing was built in the 80s and has not been funded well. But if you look at places like Austria, if you look at places like China, if you look at places like Norway and Finland, their public housing is amazing, especially Austria. If you after this, if you just research public housing in Austria, I think your mind will be blown about what is possible with good government um, policies and good funding.
Got it. And yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I definitely learned something new when we talk, and that's good. I like to learn new things. I go back to, and maybe America is a bad example because our government funding, I think our government mismanages money.
I think we both agree on that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's why someone like me is like probably against a wealth tax, not because I don't think that it's my responsibility or the responsibility of people who are successful to help out those beneath us or who are disadvantaged. It's because I don't trust that the government is going to do a good job of spending the money. And another example that I'll use is my wife and I, we don't have kids yet, but we want to someday. And we've talked a whole lot about whether to send our kids to private school or public school. Of course, public school is funded by taxpayers and it's run by the government, and private school is run by a private entity and you actually pay to go there. So the reason why we were considering public school is because we think that public school is incredibly important. Obviously it is. And we want to show more investment going in there. But we will probably end up sending our kids to private school because the private schools give a better education compared to these publicly run schools by the government. And I actually have family members who are teachers and work in the public school industry, and they're like, they wouldn't fault me for sending my children to private school. And that to me is another example of like, man, the reason why the private schools, at least in my area, offer better education is because they sort of have to get anyone to actually go there, right? Because if they didn't provide a good enough education, we would just send them to the public schools, which is free. I mean, it's tax dollars, but there's no tuition. Where the school I'm considering sending my kids to, I think it's like $30,000 per year per kid. So the only reason I'm going to be able to pony up that cash or want to pony up that cash is if that school is providing a substantially better education than the public school alternative.
I first of all, I would not fault you for sending your kids to private school. I have siblings, and both of them send them to a private school. So you know, you have to do what's best for your children when you do have them. Another reason I don't really have like a gripe with private school is because the people who pay to send their kids to private school are still paying taxes. So they're paying in, but they're not getting out, which it's fine with me. But I think if, in terms of providing high quality education to the mass of people, that is only possible through taxing people. And I think the way that we fund schools now is the fundamental problem why there's such like an inequality for you feel the need to send your kids to a private school, because it's all depending on where you live. Instead of pulling the money together and then distribute it evenly, we do it through zip code.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look at examples like Denmark, they abolished private school, and there's quality of school is higher than those of Finland and Norway, which both have private schools. So I think if we look at what will provide the most like high quality education for the most amount of people, that is only possible through funding through taxes. And we have real life examples like Denmark to look at. But in terms of if you want to send your kids to private school, I'm not going to fault you because you're still contributing your taxes, which fund schools, which people who choose not to can access. But I have an issue is if people who go to private school start advocating for A, taxes fund private school, or B, their taxes be excluded, that's when I start having issues. And we have seen issues like that in terms of like when Betsy DeVos was the presidential, the one who runs the schools. She advocated for school choice, letting kids or parents choose where their kids go to, which was really just funneling more money out of the schools that are underfunded into the wealthy areas. Because if you give them school choice, every parent is going to want their kid to have the best education, and the best education is in the higher paying zip codes.
Mm-hmm.
But the downfall is that more money will be taken out of the schools that need it the most.
Right. Absolutely. No, I agree. And I think, and to me, that's another reason why, like, for whatever reason, our government just isn't great at it, because you're right. There was a story, I forget her name, but a woman went to jail for 4 years because she lived in a poor neighborhood and she fudged the numbers on her zip code and she drove her kid to a better school.
Yeah,
And she
yeah, and it's insane to jail that woman because any human being would do that for their children.
totally.
Like policies like that are insane to me, and
Yeah.
they're avoidable if we follow models like Denmark that have abolished. They were able to abolish private school because they provided such high quality um, public school to the masses that they voted in favor of getting rid of private schools because they didn't see a need for it anymore. Like if we implement these policies, like if we just cut and paste here in the US, I think we would solve so many problems in terms of schooling and access to higher education for children.
Now, so Denmark is an interesting example because sometimes, and I agree with you that the certainly other places, other countries have superior education than Americans do. Like there's no question. Again, my brother-in-law is from India, and although India wouldn't even be on the same level as far as like first world country, his education that he got there was better. And he might have been. He's also incredibly smart, so that might have been the whole other thing. But Denmark, I also find sometimes it's a trade-off. You can get better things here, but what you sacrifice maybe is freedom that Americans have that in Denmark they don't necessarily have. Like in Denmark, I don't know if you know this or not, but you have to get permission from the government as far as what you're going to name your baby. So and your partner, you have a baby, right? You're expecting a baby. There is a list of pre-approved baby names in Denmark that if you deviate from that list, you have to ask permission. And about 20% of the names that are deviated from the list get denied by the government. Like you're not allowed to name your kid that. And Denmark also, this might have changed in the last couple of years, but before this, those lists of pre-approved baby names, it was very specific to gender, meaning the name that you gave to your baby would have to indicate the baby's gender. So this notion about gender is a spectrum and you can identify this and that. Not in Denmark, dude. Like you got to name, if your baby's a girl, you got to give that baby a girl name, a pre-approved girl name. And so in America, you can name your kid whatever the hell you want. And so I think that's part of the thing though, right? Is like, that's sort of the American way is like, we sort of do whatever we want. And then the chips fall where they do. And other countries might be better in a few areas, but they have way less freedom. And so would you say that freedom is just the price to pay for equality? Or would you say that freedom is not something that should be sacrificed in the name of equality?
I would push back on the notion that here in America we're more free. It just depends on when you look at. Yeah, I think that example I'll have to look into it, but if that's true about Denmark, that's kind of crazy.
It's
I
wild.
think yeah, if I was Danish, I would look to maybe get rid of that. But if that is the case, like I don't think I personally don't think here in America we have much freedoms. Like for example, in terms of a job, you don't really have much choice. You either have to work if you don't have a degree or high skills. You either have to work a low quality job or you starve and you die. I don't see that as a choice. I see that as kind of forced. Also with healthcare here, I don't really see we have freedom to choose. You either have access to it or you don't, and if you don't, then you're gonna get billed like crazy. Like I don't really see what freedom means to Americans. Like freedom to choose where you live. If if you want to live in San Francisco, you're priced out. You don't have a choice to live there. Do you see what I'm saying? Like it just depends on how you qualify freedom. I look at the Danish and I think they're more free than us. They can choose wherever they live. They don't have to. They can switch jobs if they want to because their health insurance is not tied to their jobs. They don't have to worry about if I move here, then the schools are going to be bad, so I can't move there. So they have more. In my mind, they have more freedom to roam. Maybe the trade-offs that they think are worth it are a little silly to us and we don't understand it. But, if that was the case here in America, I would take that trade-off for, great public education and universal healthcare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can agree with you that the healthcare system in this country needs a reset button. It's really bad. And I know that because I used to work in healthcare. I specifically health insurance. It's awful.
Oh,
It's racket.
yeah.
Yeah, and I knew that firsthand because I worked in the industry. And I guess my pushback to you about the not having freedom, like one of the things you mentioned was jobs, like you either work or you starve. First, I agree that I agree that nobody should starve. If the prevailing system is capitalism, there has to be a safety net. And I feel like we we do a pretty good job on that. Like not as good as some other countries, but far better than many other countries where people are actually starving to death. I feel like, we live in way too good of a country to let people starve to death. So we should absolutely, if the prevailing system is capitalism, there's got to be food stamps and all these other things, because capitalism creates choices and choices create inequality. And so there's that whole thing. But something that you mentioned that I found interesting was like, not having the choice to choose your job. But I would argue that here you can pretty much do whatever you want to do or be whatever you want to be. You just sort of got to put the work in. And I understand that some people are disadvantaged. Like if you're a girl who gets like pregnant at 14, then your opportunities shrink drastically, right? Like, I mean, that for sure, that goes away. You have to go start working to take care of that baby immediately. And the job that's available to you as a 14-year-old is probably a minimum wage job. And if your whole world is about feeding your baby, you probably don't have a lot of time or bandwidth to go to school to get a better job. But barring some of those extreme circumstances, this country allows some of the rarest opportunities where, like, I grew up, I was born in poverty, right? Like I was in the poverty line, and I could have stayed in that environment, but I chose to get out of it. And I'm not so arrogant as to say that I didn't get lucky along the way. Of course I did, but I chose to move in the right direction. And now I live the life I, could have only dreamed about when I was a kid. And so I do think the freedom of choice that we have here is important, but I'd be curious to see what you have to say about that.
Yeah, when I say freedom of choice, like for example, I work for Disney. I'm not really happy where I am, but I can't really leave because I need money to live and they provide me health insurance. And until I find a job that provides both those things, I can't really quit. Whereas if I lived in a more, equal society that had free healthcare, then I wouldn't have to worry about that. I could just find a job that just pays more or is more convenient to my needs. But, since I live here in the United States, I don't really have that choice. And I would agree with you that there is access to better jobs, but you either have to go to school or have a high skill. And I think that here in the United States, we have put barriers to get to that. And those barriers are money. If you want to go to school, it costs a lot. If you want to, become an apprentice for a trade, that costs a lot because you either have to, sorry.
All good.
You either have to, you either have to agree to not get paid for a little bit. Sorry. You either have to agree to not get paid for a little bit if you're an apprentice, or you have to agree to pay absurd amount of money for higher education, which is the route I have chosen. And it's not fun, paying for a lot. But I know, just like you, if I want to have a better job or a better life, this is what things I need to have. And I would say we don't really have much choice because those barriers are in place. Whereas if we lived, like even in Germany, for example, their education up to the university level is either high or highly reduced. So people can, if they want to become something, there's not much barriers that provide them from moving to that. So I think they have more job freedom in terms of that. Where here, even me, I have pretty good skills. I can, trade jobs pretty easily, but I need health insurance because that's just, that's the reality. People need health insurance. People need money to live. I need money to live. I can get another job that pays more, but it wouldn't provide me with health insurance. So I'm stuck. I feel physically stuck in this job until I graduate.
Got it. So basically, until you graduate and have a degree under your belt or some more skills, you feel stuck working where you are.
Yeah, and then I think that would apply to many people who have children, maybe they live close to school and they like the school, so they can't really, switch jobs or move, or maybe they have, just other things that ail them. And I think that's the majority of people. The majority of people in the United States have these barriers that are preventing them from switching jobs because it's scary. I don't know if you remember what it was like to, work a minimum job. It's scary because there's that little time where you don't really have an income and you're thinking, oh, what am I going to do? What if I fall back? What if I get evicted? Like there are these real fears that exist when in terms of switching jobs, and they could be eliminated if those fears that are provided by being homeless or, losing critical benefits that you need, if these things are provided, then in my mind, we have more freedom of choice in terms of where we want to work, because they're not tied to this job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree about the healthcare thing. I think the healthcare system, specifically health insurance, it's awful. I mean, but I'll say this. We have, and you probably agree with this, and you can correct me if you don't, we probably have the best medical care in the world as long as you can pay for it, right? Like if you can't pay for it, then yeah, you're screwed. if you can pay for it, like the best doctors, the best hospitals, we have that going on for us. The problem is it's so unaffordable. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I would not. I think yes with an asterisk. Yes, but in very niche categories, we have the best doctors. Like in a specific cancer research, yes, maybe we have the best in the world. But in terms of quality overall of healthcare, I think we are not the best by far. And I think if we look at countries who have way less than us, like Vietnam, like Cuba, their health system is so much better than ours. If you look at it overall, not in terms of high quality in this one specific cancer research, no, but overall, I would say they have a more better system because their ideology of health system is preventable health system and easy access. So they have the highest patient per doctor ratio in the world because they know that a healthy population is a happy population, and a happy population is going to live a more, better life. So I think if we compare it, just I mean, Cuba is a very poor country. I think we would both agree on that. But if you look at their health system compared to ours, theirs blows us out of the water. They have a higher life expectancy rate, and they have a lower infant mortality rate than ours. So if we're the richest country in the world, how can a country like Cuba beat us in all these metrics? And if you look at other countries like Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, they all have better health systems than ours. And it's either free or highly reduced. And I would take that trade off if we didn't have the best doctors in this world in this one specific, research of cancer, and we had a better overall for everyone.
Got it. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I've never been to Cuba, so I can't speak to Cuba. I know that over the summer there were some riots in Cuba, and it seemed to me that they were protesting communism. That's at least what it seemed to me. I will admit I saw it through the filter of a TV screen, and the media
Yeah.
can do whatever they choose. But that's at least from an American looking at it. It seemed like they were protesting the lack of freedom and sort of like they wanted to get out of all this government control. But that's just, again, that's my perspective of the TV screen. But I'm curious to know. So okay, so you're going into college. What are you studying right now?
Journalism.
Journalism. Okay, so you want to be a journalist when you graduate?
Yes.
Okay, awesome, cool, yeah, sweet. We need more good journalists because a lot of it today is rubbish. So okay, and then would you say, as far as like let's say you start making a lot of money as a journalist, would you be in favor of voting that you pay more taxes? Let's say you're a crazy journalist on TV and you make $10 million a year. Are you like okay to be taxed at 90% so that other people can get access to things like healthcare and education? And I know you don't make it yet, so we can say whatever. It
I know, I
doesn't
know.
count until you do it. But what are your thoughts on that? Like the money that you make as a journalist, redistributing that so people that make less than you can have more things.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy for me to say yes now, but if I ever get to that point, maybe, well, I don't think my ideals will change, but maybe the viewers will think that my ideals will change. But yeah, I think I would have no issue. Like, let's say if I make hypothetically $10 million, and then after 5 million, it gets taxed at 90%. My life is still going to be pretty good. I'm not going to be struggling. I'm not going to be, maybe I won't be able to afford my sixth house. Oh no, woe's me, but I would be okay with that. And I think that as someone who has benefited from many programs such as like WIC and, growing up and affordable housing, like my family lived in a house for the first time because part of the city paid part of the rent. And I remember that was just like mind changing for me to know that like we live in a house now. We don't even own it, but we live in it. That kind of thing is a life changing experience as a kid. So, as someone who has benefited from them, I would have no issues with that. And I know that's not the case because, my partner had some very interesting ideas about, programs like WIC. And, I had to change those types of thinking because I feel like people who talk like that, and in this case, my partner did, they don't know anyone who went through these programs or they have never personally got through the program. So they just see it from these people are leeching, but it's not leeching. It's a necessity that people need. And in order to provide them, to tax people like me, if I were to be making $10 million, I would have no issue with that at all.
Got it. Now, okay, so a couple things I'll address. So you're in school right now. How are you doing in school? A student, B student, C student, F student? I was a pretty
You,
bad student. I dropped out of college.
you know, it's very interesting. I have been struggling with college a lot because I had to work through college, but during the pandemic, let me tell you, my grades skyrocketed because
Did
I didn't
they?
have to worry. I didn't have to worry about money, and I don't have to worry about time in terms of is my classes going to align with my work schedule. So I just had time to just do my homework and actually learn more quickly, and that's how I realized that's how people who don't have to work through school get done with school so fast because this is their life. This is all I have to worry about. It was honestly it was really mind like life changing for me in terms of um really focusing on my studies and like I went from maybe high C's low B's to just A's like consistent A's and I've been able to keep that up thanks to the pandemic provided me a way for the government to fund fund me stay inside because of quarantine, but
Mhm.
that gave me the freedom to not have to worry about work, scheduling, you know, am I going to sacrifice this time to study? That means I won't have this amount for this month's rent, like such and that. All of that was gone. And, it just shows that, like, if you reduce these barriers that people have, like housing or cost or, just anxieties about living life, then people can achieve what they want quicker. And
Mhm.
I experienced that myself. It was honestly, it was pretty amazing.
So that's a case for like UBI, like Andrew Yang, like give people $1,000 a month, and then they can, have more creativity and less stress and anxiety to go pursue the things that will make them happy. And I think that there's a lot of evidence to support that something like that ought to be tested. It hasn't been tested. Well, it kind of was with stimulus checks, but not to the extent that it could be. But so let me ask you a question, and I'm always curious to know because this is silly. So your grades went to like B's and C's to A's now. Like you're a friggin' straight A student. That's amazing. It's been a
Yeah.
little while since I was in college, but that would be like 4.0, like when you have all A's. So cool. So, how would you feel if the university came to you and said, you know what, man, Mr. Nunez, you have all these A's, and that is unfair. So, we're going to redistribute some of your A's to the students who have D's and F's. And what that'll do is it'll bring your grades down, but it'll bring their grades up. So everybody will have C's. So everyone is more like average and equal. That is equality. That is equity. We're going to take your A's, give it to the people who aren't doing as well, and give everybody C's. How would you feel about that if your university came to you and said, this A that you worked hard for and you earned, this A plus that's yours, we're going to take that from you, redistribute it. You have a C now, and so does your peer students who had D's and F's. Now they have C's, but they're better off, so you should be happy.
Well, I think if you're pointing to like the equality of outcome, I would agree with you that that's not fair. No one would say it's fair. But if like let's say for example, if I hogged up all the library time and gave no people time to study, which resulted in my A and their F, and then they said we're going to redistribute the time that you're using to get this A, then I would be in favor of that. But obviously, no one would be in favor of their A being brought down to C for other people to get brought up to C to C from F's to C. But if they want to equally distribute the access I used, the free time, the library, the calculators, the tutors. If let's say I hogged up all those resources, and then I said, hey, if you want to, get access to the resources, you have to pay me. And they said, okay, we're going to get rid of that. Then I would be in favor of it. But in terms of like the argument is equality of outcome is unfair, which I think everyone would agree. But the methods to get to that outcome is unfair. That's where I would agree.
But so in this scenario, like let's assume for a second, and let's call it hogging. You hogged the library time, whatever. But let's assume that you spent more time in the library where your peers in college were out partying and doing keg stands and smoking a lot of weed and banging a lot of chicks and having a good time, and therefore their studies fell short. So they went out and they got Fs. Where you were spending more time in the library, you weren't necessarily hogging it. You were just in the library more than they were because you had the freedom of choice to go to the library. They had the freedom of choice to go to frat parties, and they did that. And so in that case, in that scenario where it's a pretty level playing field, which I'm not arguing that America is a level playing field because we're all born at different parts, like people's parents come from resources, whatever. But in college, you go to college and it's like, yeah, you can choose to go to the tutor or to the study group or whatever. You in this scenario did, your peers didn't. is it fair that your grade would be reduced to bring their grade up?
Yeah, I would say it's not fair because it's the equality of outcome argument. It's not fair. But I would say it's not fair, but let's set up a program where we can help them maybe manage their time, help them, maybe assign them like a tutor that will follow them and just remind them like, hey, you need to do this instead of partying. I would still be in favor of creating programs like that, but yeah, no, that would not be fair. Equality of outcome is not fair, and I don't think anyone like any serious person argues for it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think everybody should have equality of opportunity. I think not only is that what's fair, that's actually what's best for society as a whole. But I don't think you'll ever have equality of outcome because everyone can make their own choices. So in this scenario, by the way, that you become a world famous journalist and you're making $10 million a year, I actually don't think that you should be taxed 90% after 5 million. And we could argue that you have enough, but who's to decide that you have enough? Just like who's to decide that your A that you earn should be redistributed to somebody else? Now, if you choose to help people, I'm all for that. Just like I choose to help people, like I give money. I actually want to start 2 charities that I'm working on, and that's my choice. It's different than the government commanding me to. There's also the problem where, in the name of equality, politicians might vote. Let's say you're making $10 million a year. Politicians might vote in the name of equality to take more money from you to redistribute it. That might not ever actually get redistributed to where they're saying it's going to go. And I don't know if you've been following the whole, the UN director, I forget his name. His first name actually might have also been David. I don't remember. But he basically tweeted at Elon Musk saying,
Oh,
hey,
yes.
yeah, you saw that. So he's like, hey,
Yeah.
Elon Musk, 2% of your wealth, $6 billion, that will end world hunger. And Elon Musk tweeted back and he was like, hey, I'll give you $6 billion today if you publish exactly how the money is going to be spent. And then, of course, he didn't publish that because they were afraid of what the public would see about how the money would be spent. So they didn't take Elon Musk up on his offer and they turned down $6 billion. And to me, that's a glaring example of like, dude, the government and these people that say we need money for XYZ, they're spending it improperly. And that's why they don't want it to be published. But I'd be curious to hear what you think about that.
Well, my thoughts on Elon Musk are not very kind. I think that was just a bunch of posturing that was never going to come about. Um, yeah, for a guy whose company survived on government subsidies in the early years, it's really interesting that he's shitting on them now when he has amassed a large amounts of wealth through his stock. So that's just my personal, you know, idea about Elon Musk. But I think corruption is always going to exist. I don't think it's ever possible to fully get rid of it, but I think um, if you have corruption, but the policies are benefiting the people at large, then I'll take that trade off as long as we like strive to fight corruption. But like if we have corruption now in the United States, where our policies are angled towards helping the rich get richer, then I don't think it matters that the corruption is there or the reallocation is not right. I think it's the system that is creating the problem. So first we must address the systems, and then we can address the corruption.
Now, if let's say everybody can eat, let's say nobody's starving to death, just say a utopic world, nobody's starving. Some people still have billions and billions of dollars, and some people, they're not starving, but they don't have a lot of money. Is wealth inequality, is it a problem, or is it only a problem because some people are starving to death and can't survive?
I think in that scenario, you're describing a very what we call a democratic socialist scenario, like Norway and Sweden, where yes, they have billionaires, but the disparity between them and the lower class just gets shrunk. And I think in terms of that, yeah, it's a pretty good system. But I personally think that there's still going to be inequality if we have laws like we have here, where if you look at our financial public or campaign funding laws, where money is speech, and there's a billionaire, there's definitely going to be a situation where problems are going to occur because yeah, you're not starving, but this one person is dictating the laws through his speech, aka his money, and we are not. So I think in terms of that situation, it would be a much much better world than the one we live in here in the United States, and I would definitely take it over the one we have now. But I think we can't stop there because other problems like that are going to arise. And if you want to live in a better society, I think we should try to move past that. And that's why I advocate for socialism, not democratic socialism, which is what the case that you describe is pretty much is. If you look at countries like Norway and Sweden and Denmark and Finland.
Got it. And for anyone who doesn't follow or doesn't know, what he's referring to is basically, obviously in this country you have freedom of speech, and money is considered a form of speech, so you can spend it as freely as you wish, whether it's funding campaigns or what have you. So that's sort of like the background of that. So, okay, so you mentioned you dislike Elon Musk. I don't mind Elon Musk. I don't mind him. So here's what's here I will tell you why I don't mind him, and then maybe you can say it. And I'm not saying he doesn't have crazy money and he can never spend it. I agree. He does have a crazy amount of money, more than any one person will be able to spend in their lifetime. But I'm sure you would agree that one of the problems coming down the pipeline that really nobody's doing anything about is climate change. And so that's a problem that, we don't know exactly how bad it is. We don't know to what degree human beings are contributing to it. We don't really know how to correct the ship on that. But in a world where climate change is an issue, Elon Musk has revolutionized the electric car industry, which has cut back on fossil fuels and emissions and gasoline and oil and all these things. And he basically, that will make a greener society. Like all these other car companies are following in his suit and making electric vehicles. And I know that a lot of people were pissed off that he went to outer space. People were mad about that. But Elon Musk, as well as some of the other smartest scientists in the world, they are predicting that in about 500 million years, so a long time from now, 500 million years, one of two things is going to happen. The sun is going to expand, and when it does, it will evaporate the oceans, and life on this planet will no longer be possible. Or, in 500 million years, the sun will go out, meaning we won't have any heat from sunlight. Obviously, trees need sunlight to grow. If trees aren't growing, not producing oxygen, again, life on this planet will not be possible. So going into space is like sort of the first step in making our species become interstellar for a world that might not exist in the future. And although it's 500 million years away, if I'm the captain of a ship and I see an iceberg way off in the distance, I want to steer that ship away from the iceberg like now, even if it is way, way, way far in the distance. So by the time I actually get there, I'm way far away from the iceberg. So I'm not like a billionaire apologist, so to speak. I wouldn't say I'm a fanboy of any billionaire, but I don't hate Elon Musk because the way he's revolutionized the electric car business, and he's trying to figure out other things that like eventually, we can talk about saving the world, and yes, we should, and we should figure out climate change and all these things. But eventually, what the smartest scientists in the world are predicting is that life on this planet isn't possible. And he's one of the first people to figure out, okay, well, what steps we put in place today to make sure that when that time comes, everybody can get off the planet and figure out what to do next.
Well, I will agree with you that yes, he has revolutionized, the car world. As someone who owns an EV, I know the benefits of having one.
Oh, you do? Awesome.
Yeah, it's very, very awesome. Very awesome. Like, I look at gas prices now and I just laugh. I just laugh.
What kind of car do you drive?
I have an i3.
I don't know what that is. What is that?
BMW i3.
BMW i3. Cool.
Yes.
Okay.
Funny story. Do you know what the car used to be and why I got it at such a low price?
No, I don't know.
It used to be an LAPD car. It used to be the car that gave tickets to the people downtown.
That's
So the way it works is the LAPD, they lease for 3 years and then they just keep renewing it. So when the renew comes, the dealership just wants to hawk the old one at like a super low price. I'm talking like 8K low.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's how I managed to get an EV. But in terms of, yeah, I agree with you that he definitely revolutionized, the electric car industry, and it's a better sustainable way. But I think there are downsides to it. Like in order to make cars with the batteries, you need lithium.
Mm-hmm.
In order for lithium, you have to extract it, and if we look at places that have lithium, like Bolivia, if they don't want to play ball with us, what happens? We do a soft coup on the country. So, give or take, good things, bad things. I don't think, and then Elon openly supported the coup in Bolivia, which, not a really good thing to do if you're a good guy. But, and then in terms of SpaceX, I think if you look at SpaceX and you just look at the people who are working at SpaceX, they're all former NASA employees. They're all former government employees. So I think if if we're saying that he is revolutionizing space, I would say the people who used to work at NASA who now work at SpaceX are revolutionizing space because they are giving more funding than what NASA was giving them through SpaceX. But I don't think Elon is, the creator of that. I just think he, happened to be at the right place at the right time with the right funding and is hiring the right people. But him personally, he's not that great of a person. But um, I want to touch on, the problems for 500 million years. I don't think, I think addressing them now is optimistic, but like I said, I think we should address things like climate change at a more global level because if one country just tries to do it themselves, it's never going to work because it has to be a global thing.
Yeah, I mean it's a global issue, so we got to have the problem is the world is a big place and not everybody agrees. Like, a good country, like, so for example, a country that is not like America, but it, like, I don't know if you spend any time in the Netherlands, but they all live pretty great. And if everybody in the world lived like they lived in the Netherlands, we wouldn't be able to sustain the population, right? So like, not everybody agrees on certain things and on what to do and problems to solve. But I think maybe maybe the key difference between you and I is you have a more optimistic view on what government can do, and I have a more optimistic view of what private citizens can do. So like I also come from a family that relied on welfare and food stamps and all those things, and I know the social workers treated my mom like trash. I mean, they treated her like garbage, and it was such a long wait to get food stamps and all these things. And like, I'm not just saying we should just hope that rich people give money away. But I think that although you need government policy and you need a safety net, a social safety net if the prevailing system is capitalism, man, our government does some shady stuff. And we're not even the worst government out there. There are a lot of governments that are way worse than America's government that are corrupt, and they do way worse stuff. And even still, like our government, I mean, so if we talked about NASA for a second, I'm blanking on the name, which anyone, if you want to fact check this, you can look it up, and maybe But when Jeff Bezos went to space, he took a woman with him who used to work for NASA. And I'm forgetting her name. But when she worked for NASA, she volunteered to go to space and she was denied. And she applied to go again and she was denied again. And it was because at the time, NASA had a rule that women weren't allowed in space. They just wouldn't let her go. Like, you're not allowed to go, you're a woman. And she applied a third time and again was denied. So this is a government program telling this woman she can't go to space because she's female. And then Jeff Bezos goes, he's like, hey, you want to come? Like it was just like, oh, that's sweet. Like she never got to do that. And if it was just up to the government, she wouldn't have been able to do that. But she was able to do that with a private citizen. And again, I'm not a Jeff Bezos apologist or like, I don't worship rich people like they're demigods, nothing of the sort. I think sometimes government is propped up to be benevolent and for the people, and that's not always the case.
Well, I would push back on the idea that the United States is not the worst government in the world because if you ask a lot of people's where their issues come from, it's direct policy from the United States. So I would definitely push back on that idea a lot. But yeah, I think in terms of like that woman and Jeff Bezos, I would look at it in two ways. One would be what was the cost of making that happen? And the cost is, squeezing all the Amazon workers to the brim out of every single penny that they make and paying them scraps to the point where they have to, urinate in bags on the assembly line because they're constantly monitored to make sure the productivity is at an all-time high where their pay is not equal. Like, I think that trade-off for me is not worth it. And the other thing that I think of when I hear that is, yeah, that was the case here in the United States. If you look at the Soviet Union, their equality, they were sending women up to space from the jump, like that only existed here in the United States. That was not the case, internationally in terms of women's rights or the rights of um, just citizens to be more equal in society.
Yeah, I think we can always look to a country that's more equal, and then always look to a country that's less equal. Like, the women in Saudi Arabia don't have a fraction of the rights that women in the United States do. Like they're not even allowed to leave their house without a male companion. So I think it could always be better. Yes, it could be worse. I wouldn't say that America is the worst country in the world. I think maybe we disagree on that. I think
you need to talk to more international people, and they will tell you another story.
Well, I don't disagree that that America has, on many occasions, taken resources from other countries. Like there's for sure that has happened. Um, it's interesting because there nations conquering other nations has sort of been a given since the beginning of time. Like since the beginning of recorded language, we know that tribes went and took things from other tribes. And when they did that, they killed each other and like took slaves and all these things. Like it happened all over the world. So I don't think America is unique to the stuff that we've done. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying, like there could be, and this is an interesting conversation. If I was born 3,000 years ago, let's say, if I was born 3,000 years ago, I'm an ambitious guy. Like I own a lot of real estate. I, want to improve my life and better myself. Would I have been 3,000 years ago? Would I have been a conqueror? I don't know the answer. But if my options were like, okay, well, you can be a peasant, or you can be a farmer, or a blacksmith, or a conqueror, dude, I'd like to say that I like wouldn't have been a conqueror 3,000 years ago. Like from this lens and from like this, here we're in 2021 and we look back and we know what's right and wrong. But at the time, dude, I might have been a conqueror. Like I might have done that. You know what I mean? Like if those are my options and I was like, one job I can do, like I can go get stuff and like expand territory and like become rich, or I'm a peasant and somebody else is going to come conquer me. Like I probably would have chosen the other route. So that's an interesting conversation to have. And I'm not nearly, it's too early in the day. I'm not high enough to think about that. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, who knows what would have happened if we were born in different times?
Well, I think that's an interesting idea. I don't know if I would push back on it, but in terms of the things that America is doing, I think it's bad to look at it as we used to do that because we are currently doing that. If you look at the Bolivian coup happened in 2019, the failed Venezuelan coup happened in 2018, I believe. Like we're doing this today. We're currently doing this today. I mean, if you look at what's happening in Chile, they're getting rid of their constitution because it was written by the dictator that the United States put in place. The original 9/11 happened in Chile when a democratically elected president was a socialist. The United States said, we're going to get rid of you and install our own guy. Like these, and that happened in like the 60s. So like these things are not things that the United States used to do. It's things that they're doing today. And that's why I say you might want to rethink your idea of the United States not being the worst government in the world.
So here I'll say two things. Number one, I think it's very clear that this is our government that's doing that. And I've already made my case. Like I don't really trust our government. That's why I'm against a wealth tax. Like if we're doing all these atrocities around the world, why should we vote for politicians who want to take all the wealth from its citizens and perhaps go spend it on military stuff and go do stuff that's bad? Like so that's that thing. I think the government is, I think if you give any government too much power, it's a bad thing. And number two, all I was saying is, I don't believe that the United States is the worst country in the world. I think that it's certainly possible we're one of the biggest bullies in the world. Like there's no question. But living here, I think, is better than living in a lot of other countries, and not all of them, of course. Like if life is pretty great if you live in France. Pretty shitty if you live in friggin', if you're an untouchable in India, dude, your life sucks. Mm-hmm. Or if you're like the Rwanda, like the Hutu and the Tutsi crisis, like dude, like there are other places that are way worse to grow up than the United States. But yeah, I don't think any government should have too much power because power can corrupt. And I think it's really bad. And our government has done some terrible, terrible things. I mean, most of the terrible things that have happened in this country's history were from government. I mean, that's any law that was unjust was because the government made it so. And then it was people who got around and they, changed the law. But I think that, I think that's why I don't look at the government as the thing that's going to come save me or save other people. Like, when I grew up poor, I was like, dude, I could hope that, people give me government money or that the minimum wage increases or whatever, but it's a much more efficient way if I just go dig myself out. And I'm not saying that everybody's capable of doing that. I'm just saying I didn't trust the government to take care of me. And that's why I'm so big on like, I need to take care of myself.
Well, I think that's another idea that you and me differ. I look at it more as the government owes us rights that we are entitled to, and they're not giving us. Like, for example, you go to any town, there's going to be a post office and a library. No one ever says, "Oh, I can't believe the government is giving me this. I don't really need it." They say, "Oh, we're entitled to water, we're entitled to knowledge, we're entitled to communication." And if the government doesn't provide that, then I'm going to have an issue with it because they see it as a right. Where I'm saying if housing is a right, the government should provide it as a right. I look at housing the same way I look at the library. No one ever says, "Wow, these people aren't paying for the library. I can't believe we're wasting our money on that." Everyone thinks of it as a thing that they deserve. Everyone thinks of it as something that is free and access and easily accessible, and they look at it as right. And if they took it away, people would raise hell. And that's how I look at things in terms of the government providing rights. It's like it's like the government can either give or take away, and we always look at in the United States. We always look at what they can take away, and we never look at what they have to give to us because it's a right. Does that make sense?
It does, but the problem that I have is that the government, by definition, doesn't own anything. So in order for the government to give you something, it has to take it for somebody else. So whether it's libraries or fire departments or whatever, it doesn't. The government has no money except for what it takes in taxes. And of course, I'm not upset that we have libraries and fire departments, and like we need that stuff. Obviously, we do. But it's when the problem that I have is when people say free, because housing is never going to be free because it's going to come through tax revenue. So your taxes will go up in order to provide housing for others. That's just sort of how it works. And if that's what's deemed to be the best thing, then so be it. I think where my problem would be is, as a real estate developer, I know that private developers can do a better job, more efficient and cheaper than the government can. And what I mean by that is, like, so in New York City, there was recently a park bathroom that was built in the city of New York. And it's a government park, so the government had it done. The government spent about $2 million of taxpayer money on this bathroom. Myself, all of the real estate investors that I know of could have built that same bathroom for $250,000. So, saving the taxpayers about $1.75 million. And that's just what I mean by, like, I hear what you're saying, but the government is so inefficient in how they spend and what they do that I think I don't know if that would be a good trade-off. I think that there are so many things, like the other thing too, like you need housing to live, right? You also need food to live. But grocery stores are probably never going to be free, because if you get groceries and they're free, then there would be less of it. There would be less incentive for farmers to farm. If they have to go work all day and break their back and pay for the equipment and the land and the water and all those things, why would they spend all day farming if they're not going to reap the benefits of their crop yield?
See, that's where I think you're just a little misunderstood, because we do that now. We subsidize farmers now. We pay farmers to keep corn at a specific price. So sometimes there are days where, they just burn their corn because the government is incentivizing them and subsidizing them to do so. Same with dairy farmers. We subsidize the price of milk. If you just go north of the border to Canada, their milk is much more higher because the government is not subsidizing the cost. If you look at videos during the pandemic, that you see videos of dairy farmers, draining their milk down the drain because, the government is subsidizing it so they don't have to produce it. That is currently happening now. We are subsidizing food. I think it's great. I think it's great that we're subsidizing food because people need to be access to, affordable food. So I think your example is a little miscued because that is currently happening now. The government is subsidizing specifically corn, specifically wheat, specifically dairy. Like, these things are already happening now.
And you think it's a good thing they're subsidizing, or a bad thing?
Yeah, I think it's good because people need access to, food. People need to be fed. I'm happy that they're subsidizing it. Do I think that issues occur because, there's government money in producing dairy and corn? So, monopolies happen because, there's government money access. So companies like Monsanto's take advantage of that. Yeah, I think it's bad. We should probably break up Monsanto or make it illegal for them to, monopolize the seed. But overall, I have no issues with the government subsidizing these things because they're an essential need that people have. Food, you know? I would never be against subsidizing food. I acknowledge that there are downsides, like monopolization from Monsanto or a big dairy like Dairy Gold, you know, subsidizing and leveraging dairy farmers. Those are issues that we can address and, you know, write legislation to fight back on. But in terms of subsidizing food, I think it's great that the government is doing that.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think so I don't have a problem with capitalism, and I think you might believe you have a problem with capitalism, but if I'm hearing you correctly, your problem is with corporatism, and that's what I have a problem with too. And that's when big business and big government are in cahoots, and basically the politicians just do whatever with they agree with whoever is funding them, and that's a problem.
But I would say that the nature of capitalism is that the whole game of capitalism is to amass as much capital as you can and monopolize the industries that you're legally allowed to. That's the game. Like that, what you're describing is literally winning the game of capitalism. That's what the system incentivizes. So that is what the system is going to put out.
But with capitalism, with true free market capitalism, there's no corporate bailouts and there's no subsidies. So a business only gets big if they're providing a good value and service that people are willing to spend money to. Where corporatism, that's where the lobbying comes in. And that's where people come in to pay politicians off to change laws or keep laws a certain way, which I don't agree with. I don't think that should be the case. I don't have a problem with capitalism because it gives you freedom of choice. So for example, in my own scenario, I'm going to make a couple $1,000,000 this year. And a lot of people are really pissed off about that. But the reason why I'm going to make a couple $1,000,000 is because I'm providing a product and a service that enough people see the value in doing business with me. That's why I'm going to make the money, right? Like I have to go out and provide enough value at a cost that people are willing to pay in order to make that possible. And that's freedom of choice. That's me choosing to do this business, people choosing to do business with me. There's not any subsidies. That's not me lobbying or anything. That's just the market. And so that's why, personally, I think it's the best system is capitalism with a safety net. Because when you have capitalism, of course, as we all know, there's going to be inequality, and we shouldn't let people starve to death. But I think there's a difference between capitalism and corporatism, and I think that difference is looked over and skewed. And I think that people are truly bashing corporatism. They think that's what capitalism is, but it's truly not what a free market capitalist society should look like.
Yeah, I just totally disagree with you. Like, yeah, you would be technically like a democratic socialist because, you know, you like capitalism, but you want a big safety net. That's pretty much, you know, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark. That's what they do. I don't see it that way because, you know, that idea that it's corporatism that's the issue is a relatively new idea that sprung up in around 2019 from the IMF Foundation, and it's just a distraction from the real issue, which is, you know, capitalism. It's a system. It's if there is no free market and there is no bailouts, you know, the larger company is just going to keep eating the smaller companies until it's the only company left. That's what a free market, you know, decides what happens. If we just look at history, that's what always ends up happening. You just look at AT&T or other monopolies in the past. That's what happens, and the only way they get broken up is from the government stepping in and saying, you are too big, you need to be broken up.
But I guess my question is, so if a company doesn't start off big, right? It starts off small. And then the only way they get big is enough people find value in shopping there. I mean, that's just sort of like how it happens, right? I mean, like, so you have this company that starts, they get customers or not. Most businesses fail, by the way, like 95% of new businesses fail. And only a few businesses go on, you know, to become better. And the way to do that is they provide value. They have to provide some sort of value or no one's going to do business with them. But I guess, you know, if we talk about like the extremes of capitalism and socialism, I mean, you're very educated on the topic, so I'm sure you know about, you know, after World War I, what happened in Russia, where a lot of peasants became farmers. And just like anything, you know, like we talked about equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome, like anything, a few of those Russian farmers were successful. A very select few, whether it's because they had better land or they worked harder or the soil was richer on their side of the road, who knows what the reason was, but some farmers were more successful than others. And then, of course, communist Russia at the time didn't like that. And they convinced all of the farmers who weren't as successful that their rich neighbors were evil and greedy. So then they banished them to Siberia, or they told them they couldn't be farmers anymore, or they were executed. And then what happened is when you take all the best farmers and you get rid of them, there was nobody left to grow food. And under that regime, 6 million people starved to death. So that's another extreme where it's like, okay, yeah, 6 million people starved to death, but at least there's no rich people anymore. Like that, I think if we're all equally poor and equally miserable, why is that better than a few people having a lot of money and some people having less and less and less, as long as there is some sort of safety net where your citizens aren't starving to death, given they don't, I understand that some people have like drug addictions or like mental disabilities that like they literally live on the street. And I don't think our country is doing a very good job about that either. But other than those extreme scenarios, like there are programs in place, or there should be, to help people not starve. But people starve to death in communism and socialism too. And, that happened.
Yeah, well, my fellow comrades might hate me, but I'm not gonna defend, Stalin's policy post World War II. It was a little authoritarianism, but I think if you paint all of the Soviet Union under the brush of, Stalin's Russia, I would say that would be the equivalent to painting the United States race relations from the 1950s for the whole duration of their existence. I think it would be a little bit unfair. Like, yes, those policies did happen, but they happened in the 50s, and after Khrushchev came to power, those quickly disappeared and were not the norm. So I think qualifying the USSR's policies like that is a little unfair, and in my opinion. And I think if you look at the successes that they had in the short amount of time that they did, it's pretty amazing. Even to this day, the only country that has lifted so many people out of poverty is China, like modern day China. Before then, the USSR was the biggest one. But I think if you look at the society of the USSR during its existence, and you look at Russia, what it is now, I think you would be hard pressed to say that Russia is better off now. Like I have a few Russian friends, and they always tell me that in Russia there's no middle class. There's just the super rich and then the poor, and there's nothing in the middle. Where I know, as before, everyone was equal. So maybe they didn't have much food, but they were happy because they had access to things that made them happy, like a family, a house, a job, a guaranteed job. If you graduate from, like, for example, in the USSR, when university was free or reduced, and once you graduate, all you had to do to pay off your university was work 3 years wherever the state wanted you to, and after those 3 years, you were free to do whatever you want. So that system sounds way better than what we have here now. And I think I would say life then in the USSR was much better than it is now in modern day Russia, where you just have, oligarchs who control oil, who control the roads, who control energy, who control, food, and then you have everyone else who is just poor, poor, poor. And I think that system is way worse than the collectivized ideology that the USSR engaged in.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I know we've been on this podcast for a while now, and I want to be respectful of your time, but I'll just ask you one last question because I'm curious. And I'm curious what you would think about it. So, what are your thoughts about Che Guevara being sort of propped up as like this socialist hero? Like his face is on T-shirts and guitar cases and all these things, and like in the name of socialism, and a lot of young people just like love Che Guevara because socialism. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, Che Guevara is the ultimate race traitor. He came from an affluent background, affluent family. He was a doctor in Argentina, and he said, screw all this, screw all these petty bourgeoisies. I see the inequality in the world, and I am going to betray my class, which is, the bourgeoisie, and I am going to uplift the working poor, the proletariat. So, Che is pretty awesome. Yeah, we know that he didn't want to be martyred when he was alive, but that's just, the battle is not only politically, but it's an ideological battle, and maybe that wasn't his wishes that he wanted to be as a martyr for the cause of socialism, but in the In the battle of in the battle of ideology, that's just how it goes. You know, the propaganda wars are real, and he was just used as one, and pretty successfully too. I before I even knew about like politics or anything, I would see his face everywhere on shirts, on hats. I didn't even know who he was until I started doing my research as a newly found U.S. citizen who was able to vote, and I was like, oh wow, Che Guevara was actually pretty cool.
So you would think that Che Guevara's, well, in your words, awesome or pretty cool.
Yeah, he was. I mean, to go from living a plush life in Argentina when there was mass inequality at the time to having the first successful revolution in the Americas, like socialist revolution is amazing to me. And then to have a prominent place upon the Cuban government and then be dissatisfied because he wants to create more revolutions and uplift the masses in other places. I think that's amazing. I mean, after the revolution, he had it made. He had a cushion position in the Cuban government. He didn't have to do that anymore. He could just live very comfortably in the nation that he successfully revolutionized and uplifted the poor. But he chose to not do that. He went to Bolivia. He tried to start another revolution, and he died doing what was best for the poor people in Bolivia. Uplift the masses. So yeah, I think he's pretty freaking amazing. I know that a lot of people will point to the racist comments that he had when he was a young man, and I think if anybody reads his book, by the end of his book, he acknowledges that his way of thinking before he sought out the journey of discovering himself when he traveled to the Americas and saw the inequality. He said that that person is dead now, and there is a newly born Che Guevara that understands that those comments were made, when he was uneducated about race relations in the United States and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your opinion on Che Guevara. I appreciate that. The only thing that makes me super curious, because so many young people love Che, and I saw, there was a Pride parade in Seattle, and his, face was everywhere on T-shirts.
So weird, right? You would never expect it to be in a pride parade. Like,
Well, exactly, because Che Guevara was incredibly homophobic.
yeah, he had those remarks early in his life, but he later denounced them and atoned for them later on in his life as he went to live, and educate himself more in the socialism ideology and communism ideology. So yeah, he definitely did have problematic comments in the past. I mean, even me, I had very, very skewed ideas about LGBT people and trans people in general. But as you educate yourself through life, you understand that that thinking that you used to have is not right, and you denounce it, and you try to live up to the socialist ideology that you've been taught, and that's what Jay did. So yeah, I admire him a
But
lot, a
even,
lot, a lot.
I guess my pushback would be like, even during his revolution in Cuba, I mean, he said he went on record for saying that gay men are an abomination and that they should be executed. I mean, he called for their execution, and young people just love him though, because socialism. And I guess my point to all of this is just to say is that I think people can get very wrapped up in an ideal that they agree with, but sometimes what's going on in your head is a utopic version of that idea, whether it's capitalism, socialism, communism, or whatever. And to make an individual or individuals out as like, holier than thou, I think is a mistake. And I think that, I mean, in this specific case, I was baffled when I saw Che Guevara shirts at a pride parade, because I was like, dude, if he met you on the street in Cuba, he would have called for your execution. I mean, that shit happened.
Yeah,
So
he did do that at that time, but it's like that's like to me that's the equivalent of saying I can't believe people revere um, Abraham Lincoln because early on in his career he said that he would keep slavery to preserve the Union. Oh my God, I can't believe it. He was pro-slavery. Like, yeah, maybe he was at that time, but as time grew on, he later changed his stance, and he is now the Abe Lincoln that everyone like reveres today. So that when you say things like that, that's the equivalent to me. It's like, yeah, he did say that he did have very backwards thinking about LGBT people, but he later reconciled his ideas and renounced them.
I think any politician will say something to get whatever the majority of people they think is going to get votes their way, whether
But
it's Abraham
but
Lincoln.
that's the thing. Che Guevara was not a politician. He gave up his political life in Cuba
Right.
to
Yes.
lead more revolutions. He was a true revolutionary, and he understood that to uplift the masses, you have to uplift every poor masses because if there's exploitation, there can never be true equality of the masses.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. He wasn't a politician. He was, revolutionizing Cuba. I find that I guess I just find it ironic. Same thing with like, and I'll be done picking on Che, but like, Hillary Clinton, for example, um, her friend and mentor. I don't know if you have seen this or heard this. Her friend and mentor was a man named Robert C. Byrd, and he died in 2010. And when Robert Byrd died in 2010, Hillary Clinton went on the news, went on camera, and said that we've lost a true American hero. Robert was my good friend, my solid mentor. Robert Byrd was one of the longest reigning members of Senate for the Democratic Party.
Yeah, the bird rule.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And he was also the Grand Cyclops of the KKK.
Yeah.
And he recruited 150 people there. And so, and again, I'm not saying this. I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I'm not a Trump fan. But in 2016, when people were like, hey, if you vote for Trump, you're racist. And if you vote for Hillary, you're not racist. It was like, but Hillary's mentor was literally the Grand Cyclops of the KKK. So it's like, I just think that people have like this utopic idea of whatever capitalism is or socialism or whatever. And I think that it's not fair to say that, oh yeah, my utopic idea is the best version of it, because it doesn't necessarily exist. It's always flawed. It's always skewed. And I think that at least with capitalism, with a truly free market capitalism, like we should get back to, in my opinion, I think we're more corporatism now. But I think with that gives itself to the most amount of free choice. And free choice is something that I like. And I know we're probably never going to agree completely on that, but that's fine. We can disagree and still be friendly.
I think you're stumbling on something that I agree with you. I think when you look at the elite, the ruling class, there is always solidarity between them. I think that Hillary Clinton example is a perfect example. I think Barack Obama saying we should not look back, we should look forward with the question of charging the war criminals from the Bush administration on their war crimes. I think if you look at just just look at examples like that, there is always solidarity between the ruling elites, and there is never solidarity between the working class. And I think that is the biggest thing that you just hit on. And I think when you realize that, then your mind can be free to start thinking about other solutions other than the status quo. Because,
I agree.
I agree with you.
Yeah, the ruling class controls everything, and they leave the poor to fight amongst themselves about race, politics, and religion. I 100% think that. I mean, that's true. Well, hey, dude, thank you so much for coming on today. I appreciate it. I know that it's not always the most fun to have a conversation with people who you might butt heads on certain things, but I feel like we could reach across the aisle and find some common ground. But is there any last minute thing you want to tell the good people of YouTube before we sign off today? I don't want to take up much more of your time.
Yeah, I think both YouTube and you don't be afraid of that socialism word, man. The things that you described, if you would lived in Norway or Denmark and Finland, you would be just like every other democratic socialist. You know what you aspire fits perfectly in line with democratic socialism. So don't be afraid of that word. If you're interested in knowing more, contact your local DSA. In Seattle they have a very, very active and prominent DSA. So if you're ever interested to learn more, contact your local DSA. It'll change your life. They are great people who do great things in the community.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you for coming on again. With Denmark, the baby name gets me, man. I want to name.
Okay. I'll do you a bet. I will look up the Denmark thing, and you. Let's see. What should you? There's something I wanted you to look up. Oh, you look up the Bolivian coup. You look up that.
Yeah.
Because that was very recent.
Yeah, that's about when I said America's one of the greatest countries.
Bolivia has mass amounts of lithium.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they have a socialist government. By the way, who increased their economy by 3x in the past 5 years. You don't hear about that on the mainstream media, do you?
Well, there's a lot of things you don't hear about in the mainstream media. I think both CNN and Fox News lie every time they get on camera. So Yeah, the media is a whole other problem, a whole other topic for another video.
So
But
I will look up the Denmark, and you look up the Bolivian coup.
we'll do. Awesome, man. Well, hey, thanks for your time today.
Yeah, man. Have a good day.